Hello and welcome to NewsClick. Several recent developments in China, both domestic and in its foreign policy, have drawn considerable attention. To discuss these, NewsClick is fortunate to have with us today one of the foremost authorities on China, Dr. G.P. Deshpande, formerly Professor of Chinese Studies in Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi. Good to have you with us, GPD. For long, China was regarded as being quite withdrawn in international affairs and reluctant to take overt positions on major global issues. However, we've seen recently in the Copenhagen climate talks, China took the front seat. It's also been very forthcoming in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And with respect to Russia, are these signs of a new assertive China on the global stage?
I would take the view that China was really never withdrawn. It was the case really that the world would not want to deal with it, and the sense of isolation was created from that. I do not think the Chinese wanted isolation, they pursued it or anything of the kind. Right from 71 till 71, perhaps you can say that this story was different, but from 71 onwards, particularly, I mean, they're joining the United Nations, that is, the Security Council, and so on. So it has changed considerably, slowly but definitely. It has changed. Number one. Number two is that I would not use the word assertive. I have some problems with that word, because it is used with only third world states, China, India, and others, who start making propositions about the world distribution of power and things like that. The West treats it as assertion. But in case of China, another thing happened. That it is what could be called the N5 and the P5. It's one of the 5 nuclear powers, one of the 5 permanent members of the United Nations. Now that made China increasingly conscious of its managerial role. The world system now really is sought to be controlled by the P5 and the N5. Sure. And the Chinese have got that state, and that's why Chinese are so reluctant. For example, I mean, not that they are against it, but they are clearly reluctant in putting it in so many words. Well, we want India in the Security Council, or it should be the permanent member of the Security Council, because it's a management. Management role, and you are sort of expanding the management council of world politics, as it were. That really began in a substantial way on this question of non-proliferation, and the kind of positions that they have taken. And once they started taking those positions as a permanent member of the Security Council, they must have realized, indeed they did, I mean, they may not put it in so many words, but they certainly saw it, that now they have to play a sort of a role which is like a member of the, as I said, a management council.
Sure.
The management council of 5.
Sure.
Prevent any further inroads into that. Right. Prevent a situation in which any conflict or any tension might lead to the challenge of these roles of the management council.
Dealing with the outside world and with major powers in what you call the management council of world affairs, how do you see the Sino-US relationship?
Although it is the 5 who are in many ways in the management council, ultimately people who matter as of now are really the Americans and the Chinese. Right. To a lesser extent, the Russians. But certainly the English and the French do not figure at the international management to the same extent. And that is why you see the Chinese being active over the last nearly 5-7 years in Africa, in a substantial sort of way. They're buying up sources of minerals, oil and all the rest of it. Their investment in Africa is phenomenal. Now increasingly in Chinese export and import patterns, you have what I would, for want of a better term, would call a colonial relationship. Yeah. That is to say, we, for example, would supply them iron ore, and they would really supply to us the finished goods. It's characteristic colonial colonial relationship. Now, of course, colonialism is dead and gone, but it nevertheless is a relationship of dominance, or likely to be a relationship of dominance. So this kind of a celebration in India, for example, of the rising Sino-Indian trade, sometimes makes me a little uneasy. It is rising trade, of course, and I'm not saying that it should not be, but the relationship that is emerging over a period of time is, I think, inherently anti-India, or to put it differently, inherently anti-third world countries.
China recently held its 11th National People's Congress in March, and Premier Wen Jiabao, in his government's work report, has recognized what has been spoken about in international circles quite often, namely the problem posed by large and widening differentials in income between regions and between classes. How do you see this problem and the steps that China is likely to take towards its solution?
Anybody in the world, except for the traditional left, has not really seen the problem, or how deep is the divide. But the divide is clear, both, as you said, the class-wide divide and also the region-wise divide is substantial. But there is one corrective in all this, and that corrective, for example, which doesn't obtain here in India, but certainly obtains in China, is that the dominance of the Communist Party there, and has helped them to an extent not to forget completely the welfare aspect of governance. Chinese Communist Party, one should of course say that there may not be much communism left there. It's probably not. It's quite clearly a state and party controlled capitalism, or whatever one wishes to describe that. But in spite of that, there's no doubt about it, that what is still left in the party control, number one, is this, that the welfare instinct is very strong. And I have a feeling that you will see in the next five years a whole range of programs put into action.
Right. In this context, ethnic disturbances in Xinjiang province among the Uyghurs, the continuing problems in Tibet have of course also made the headlines. How much of these disturbances and the problems that we see are a reflection of a genuine feeling of domination in these regions by the majority Han Chinese, and how much should be attributed to this regional disparities in development that we've been speaking about?
It is always the case that both are present. You see, because after all, in the kind of situation where a state in a backward economic and political conditions trying to achieve a degree of modernity, we generate social tensions anyway. And these social tensions always take a majority-minority perspective. It happens all over the world. Something of that kind is happening in China. But so far there is really no substantial evidence to believe that these are not manageable tensions. Right. Whether of the Uyghurs and the Tibet or the Tibetan. Tibetan certainly is far more manageable. There might be some problems with the Uyghurs because of the fundamentalism, not very far off. After all, it is connected with Central Asian states, which in turn connected with Iran and general Mid-West. So you never can tell when these influences will be stronger and will start operating in former Soviet Central Asian states, and then move on to China. So that way the potential disturbance center really is Xinjiang. I'm not saying that there are no tensions between the Han Chinese and the Tibetans. Of course there are. But I do not, they are, to a certain extent, international press plays that up a great deal. And it actually thinks that the Dalai Lama still retains a degree of dynamism and an appeal, even which he can exude even in exile. No, I'm not quite sure of that at all. In fact, increasingly now, Tibet is moving towards not tension-free entirely, of course,
Sure.
but tension-filled, quietude nevertheless, you see. But it's tense, sure, but I don't think it is anything beyond that. And Asian societies, all Asian societies
have been used to
they are used to tensions.
Right.
We manage them with in faltering manner, maybe, or something. Even if we can do it, I don't think the Chinese would have any difficulty. Far more organized people than we are.
Thank you very much.